Hi guys, Jill Mathis here with Photography Concentrate. Today I've put together a short video about something we all do from time to time, regardless of what your usual genre is, and that's portraits. By the way, I'll be using the site Unsplash to get all the portraits we'll be looking at today. Now, I wanted to go over a few pointers in the form of a checklist for those of you who are either just starting out taking portraits, or for those of you, like me, who don't necessarily do portraits very often. Those of you who know me know that my commercial work, I specialize in industrial photography. It's not really a genre where I get much practice taking portraits. I photograph in factories, and I'm usually looking for more abstract compositions without people that are based on form and color. Painterly is a term used often to describe my work. I also oftentimes focus on the hands of the factory workers when I find situations that are particularly interesting, but that is about the extent of my figurative work. Since photography is a fluid art, and in theory, your camera is a universal tool, there are many times when you'll get asked to take a portrait. No matter what kind of photography you do, there will always be someone who will ask if you do portraits. Every one of my current industrial clients has asked me to do a portrait at one time or another. Usually it's the factory owner or a CEO, though one client even asked me to photograph all their employees for an annual report one year. As with everything, the more you do something, the better you are at it. But the problem arises for me is that in my line of work, I just don't get asked to do that many portraits, and I don't really think about doing them necessarily for my own pleasure. So I gave some thought about what comes to mind when I'm faced with or just want to take a portrait. And here is a list of 7 things I try to avoid and look out for when I'm doing a portrait. I wanted to create a what to avoid list instead of a to-do list. I found that sometimes creating a list of things to do can sort of foster boundaries for your imagination by limiting what you do just to that list. Instead, keeping in mind certain pitfalls or things to avoid leaves your mind and your imagination open to soar. There will be times when some of these things I'm going to list are unavoidable, but as long as you are making a conscious decision for each photo and are aware of what you're doing, then you'll be just fine. The first on the list is that we want to avoid those sort of twee or banal poses that everyone uses. Sometimes it might help you and your subject to get into the groove by starting out with some of those go-to poses. They're recognizable, so they're easy for someone to do without much thought. But once you get warmed up, then it's time to go beyond the banal. Relying too much on those sort of phone-it-in poses won't challenge you, won't open you up to those serendipitous moments where the creativity lives. And in the end, they won't help you stand out from what are now the billions of photographers out there. And for the love of photography, try and keep those hands in the air poses to a minimum. Scrolling through the site Unsplash for examples of portraits, there were probably 2 to 3 of those overused poses for every 5 photos I saw. So ask yourself, have I seen this pose before? And if the answer is yes, then how can I change it up a bit? You have to be your subject's mirror. Your model might have come to the shoot dressed immaculately, but little things can happen that they don't even notice that will literally ruin the photo. Your first job is to be the mirror for them, even before you raise your camera. It's your job to see that twisted strap. And don't be afraid to suggest they open the jacket since it's a little bit snug, or pull up the dress just a little. Or sit up straighter so there are fewer wrinkles in the top. You have to remember that they can't see what you're seeing, but they will see it in the photo, so it's up to you to be firm in your suggestions. The better they look, the better you look too. Confirm clothing choices before the shoot starts. While we're on the subject of clothes, these are things I always do when I'm going to be shooting a portrait, and it will make your life so much easier. I always talk with the subject first and suggest clothes without loud patterns or writing, and if at all possible, in solid colors. See the difference here in this very subtle change from this to this. I think about where I'll be shooting and make suggestions around that too. If it's a situation where a clothes change could be possible, then I ask that extras are brought, especially if you're going to be moving into more than one setting. Now, we're not talking about doing fashion shoots here, so it's important that the clothes play a backseat to the photo. It's a portrait after all, and when at all possible, the clothes need to just be complementary to the setting, not the main attraction. Your professional suggestions aren't offensive. Remember, you're the pro here. If you go to the doctor and they suggest that you cut down on the sugar, you're probably going to take that as a constructive suggestion, not as something personally offensive. And the same goes for your subject. Sometimes folks who aren't photographed regular will come to a shoot a little over the top, so keep an eagle eye out for things like too much makeup or too much jewelry. Or like in this case, don't be afraid to offend by saying there needs to be maybe a little bit more makeup. And remember though, less is usually more. Apart from the unfortunate crop, this photo could have worked since the sweater is cute for a young girl like her. But with the glasses and their reflection, not to mention her hand drawing attention to them, it's just too busy. This is where a suggestion to maybe lose the glasses would be appropriate. Or here, I like how the clothes really complement the setting, all in the same tonal range. But what do all these elements have to do with one another? The kimono with the unrelated straw hat and the scarf and the hippie glasses? I'd say one or at the maximum two of these elements would be enough. Now, if you feel uncomfortable asking someone to change what probably was a conscious clothing or accessory decision on their part, start with photographing the ensemble or the mix all together, and then one by one eliminate the other pieces that you feel are just too much until you get to the appropriate balance. Just say something like, how about we try it without the hat for a few photos? And following the adage, less is more, it applies to the photographer too. Both during the shoot, such as here where the photographer almost seemed to have forgotten the subject was the pretty lady instead of the cool rings, or here where they seem to have inexplicably set their subject on fire by adding this effects in post. Keep asking yourself, does this make sense? Why am I doing this? It's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking you are spicing things up by having folks put themselves in odd settings. Like with trees, so many photographers stick people in trees or leaning on trees, which I actually just don't get. Unless your subject is somehow connected with trees, I don't know, they make tree houses, they are an arborist, they are monkeys, it just feels a bit off. Again, ask yourself, does this make sense? Or maybe you're trying for some more movement in the photo, especially if your subject is someone who is pretty much keeping the same position. So you try directing a bit more, but without asking yourself, would I feel comfortable like that? I actually try and do the pose first. One as a way to explain what I'm looking for to my subject, and another one just to see if it's doable. The same with stiff poses. If you were sitting on a bench, would you actually sit like that? Or would you really honestly stand like that with your elbow propped up on the window? or on that brick wall in that particular position. Try it and I'll bet it doesn't feel right to you. And if it doesn't feel right, then it'll show in the photo as stiff and rigid and strained, and many times just plain silly, which is not a good look for portraits. Another way to get some flow and movement to a photo is by having the person hold something. But first of all, it's important that the object is relevant to the setting, the subject, and their clothes. I'm having a hard time seeing the relevance of having a guy dressed in black with some heavy-duty jewelry have pellets sprinkled on his head and hold flowers. And secondly, it has to be that it's held in a natural and easy way. This image feels incredibly forced, especially with that almost terrified expression, and the torn up tennis racket in this photo looks uncomfortable, and frankly, this too looks pretty silly. Again, the litmus test is to do the pose first yourself with the object and then make adjustments. Make sure you feel natural in the position so it doesn't feel forced on film. I once read that while the eyes are considered the windows to the soul, the hands are what define you. Bad hand placement is a big pitfall to avoid. Unfortunately, the hands are so easy to overlook since you are concentrating on just about a million other things calling more loudly for your attention. You can have all the right pieces in place, like in this photo, gorgeous model, great hair and makeup, super colors, but all I'm seeing is that hand in an inexplicable shape. Narrowing down to what I consider the two main errors when it comes to hands helps to put this problem issue into perspective. The first to watch out for are what we just saw: strange positions and placement. This photo here is really snapping with color, but those two fingers are so out of place hooked like that. You can't tell if she's scratching or what she's doing. Same here in these three photos. What could have been lovely and even playful images are ruined by the hands in these bizarre positions. This last one is probably more the photographer's fault, having surely provided direction and cropping so tight that it seems as if her hand is growing straight out of her head. Instead, this is the same position in theory, but far less unsettling. The other main error is relying too much on what could be considered natural placement or posture for your model. It feels comfortable to them, and in essence, it even looks comfortable to you, but rarely in a still photo. For example, I know a lot of people who stand this way, but in a photo it just looks uncomfortable or that her neck hurts. This photo of a handsome, square-jawed guy is gorgeous with great composition and lighting, but ouch, that hand folded in half looks kind of painful. In all honesty, it's a position that I actually find myself doing pretty often. It's just that, in photos, it stands out as uncomfortable enough to ruin even this image. And what woman hasn't struck one of these poses? They look fine in real life, but captured in still photos just makes the girl in black look like she has a backache and the other look like she has a twisted arm. The common thread to look for in this problem are sharp bends in the hands or wrist. Try for more softer, relaxed angles when you notice these positions, like these photos here. One of the most common questions from folks who are in front of a camera for the first time is, what do I do with my hands? A trick I learned years ago in New York City as an assistant to fashion photographers is to give your model this position as a sort of go-to when they are floundering on what to do. Photographers I worked with actually used to say, act like you're crushing fleas. The model uses her two first fingers and thumbs together as if they have a flea between their fingers. Try it. For some reason, it's a super relaxed looking pose without sharp bends in the arms or hands, and the flea idea helps having something to visualize. And lastly, a big mistake I see a lot of folks do just starting out in portraiture is concentrating so hard on the subject that they forget about the background. Here, you almost lose the model altogether with the busy background. It's a shame, too, since the color of the jumpsuit and the water and beautiful marble railing would have made a spectacular photo. Try and imagine this if the photographer had moved a little higher and her head wasn't right in the middle of the busiest part, or at the very least, if the photographer had stopped down enough to blur the background. Same here. What gorgeous colors, and it's pretty obvious the photographer was concentrating on just that. The only problem was that he got all caught up in the colors and the subject and forgot to actually look at the background. Now, look at this version. It's not a good edit by any means, but I took about 2 minutes and photoshopped out the bridge a bit just to show you the difference. How about we do a quick recap of the points to end the video. Number 1, avoid those cliched and commonplace poses so you can start to be the photographer that stands out from the rest. Get into the habit of asking yourself, have I seen this pose before? And if yes, then how can I change it up a bit? Number 2, be the mirror for your subject. Remember, they can't see what you're seeing, and the better they look in the final product, the better you're going to look. Number 3, don't rely on your model to show up with the right clothes. Confirm everything prior and think about what your surroundings will be. Number 4, your suggestions aren't going to offend anyone. Remember, you're the pro in the situation and you know best. Number 5, keep an eye out for odd postures and avoid sticking your subject into inexplicable settings. Get into the habit of always asking yourself, does this make sense? Would I feel comfortable in this position? Number 6, remember to check hand placement. Try far softer placement and look out for strange positions and avoid any sharp bends and angles. And number 7, location, location, location. Don't overlook the background. Make sure it doesn't clash or drown out your subject. These 7 pointers should help keep you on the right track, but there's no better way to make sure you understand them than getting out there and photographing yourself. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you can find me in the Mastermind Facebook group. I'll be there and looking forward to seeing some of your new work.